take some time to answer a question that I receive quite frequently, especially from pastors and ministry leaders. And it's about Proverbs 18:17, which says, in a lawsuit, the first to speak seems right until someone comes forward to cross-examine. The concern is that when I suggest, or advocates or other people talking about domestic violence suggest that we believe a disclosure, that is to say, when a victim comes to us and tells us about abuse, that we believe them, that if we were to do that, we're somehow violating Proverbs 18:17, that we really should get both sides of the story before we make an assumption. Well, I want to address a few concerns, and then I want to come back to that thought of an assumption here in a second. The first concern is this, and it has to do with how we read the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is rightly described as wisdom literature. It's a book full of great advice. I love Proverbs. It's wonderful in pastoral ministry. It's an excellent tool in counseling because it gives us bite-sized nuggets of truth that we can begin to apply. But Proverbs, by their very nature, are not promises. And so we understand that inherent in every proverb are exceptions. Basically, what we're saying is, hey, 9 times out of 10, this is how it works. But sometimes it works differently. Such as Proverbs 22, I believe it is, training up a child in the way that they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. How many parents have we counseled who have been frustrated at the realities of, what did I do wrong? I thought I raised my children right, and now they've rebelled. Well, 9 times out of 10, that proverb's correct, but there's some exceptions. Sometimes children rebel because they have their own will and their own heart. I think the same is true with Proverbs 18, which brings us to the second point. 1 is how we read Proverbs, and 2 is how we read this proverb. See, Proverb 18 is a collection of individual statements about business and relationships, and in particular, verse 17 is about settling a dispute or a conflict. Now, my first problem is applying this to abuse, is that abuse is not a conflict or a dispute. It's one person exercising power over another person. But if we're going to use it in this context and apply it to abuse situations, then it's important that we read verse 18. You see, instead of just taking verse 17 as the entire context, we should support it with verse 18 that says, casting lots settles disputes. So if verse 17 leaves us not knowing who to trust, the first who spoke or the one who cross-examined, then verse 18 suggests when you're in that type of quandary, cast lots, flip a coin, roll the dice. Now that would seem foolish to us. But if we're going to apply verse 17 to cases of abuse, then we really ought to start applying verse 18. But you know, verse 18 isn't really about chance. It's about trust. You see, in the ancient world, when a person would cast lots, it was to leave the outcome to God, not chance. And you see, it actually supported the weak and the vulnerable, because the wealthy and the powerful were much more likely to settle than they were to risk whatever on a game of chance. And I think for us, as we're hearing people who are vulnerable, as individuals are disclosing information to us, I think it would be improper to say, hold on, I don't know if you're telling me the truth. I've got to get both sides of the story. But maybe a better response, a more biblical response, even with Proverbs 18, is to trust God with the outcome and to listen intently to what you're being told, to believe a disclosure rather than dismiss it. Which brings me back to the idea of the assumption. You see, when biblical counselors, pastors, ministry leaders press me on this issue and say, Chris, are we supposed to assume that someone's an abuser? The fear is that we'll make some false accusation. But what we're not saying is that we've already made an assumption if that's the direction we're going to go. You see, we don't want to assume that someone's an abuser, but we will assume that the victim is a liar. Let's begin with truth, and let's leave the outcome to God, and give a listening ear and biblical support to those who come to us in need of help.